Lonely cowboy. Came looking for a horse, but found the family. He never knew he needed some journeys seem simple, like buying a horse, but end up becoming the turning point of an entire life. This is the story of Levi Brooks, a lonely cowboy who wandered across barren lands just to fill the empty spaces inside his soul. He wasn't searching for love, nor did he expect anything beyond silence. But fate led him to a small ranch, where a resilient woman and 6 children who had lost faith in grown-ups still tried to hold on. There were no fireworks, no warm welcome, but it was there that Levi found something he had never dared to name during all his years of drifting: a home. Before we step into this journey together, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, so we'll know how far this story has reached into hearts around the world. And don't forget to subscribe, because in the next stories, you'll realize that the warmest things in life are often the ones we never set out to find. Now, enjoy the story. Levi Brooks didn't come looking for a home. He came only to buy a horse. After 3 years drifting across the American West, trading his strength for a few gold coins, training horses on dry ranches, the only thing he had left was an old, dented brass bugle swinging from his saddle, a keepsake from the comrade who had died saving him in war. Whenever he felt worn down, he would pick it up, but he hadn't played a single note since that day. As he rode through the sunlit rocky hills of Texas Hill Country on a June morning, all he hoped for was a strong horse to carry him farther north. But when an old wooden gate appeared with the words Mason Ridge Ranch etched on it, something inside him paused, not because of the newspaper ad he had seen in San Antonio, but because of the strange stillness blanketing the land. The ranch looked deserted. A crooked fence, a wide-open barn, yet horses still grazed in the field, and the 2-story wooden house, though worn, was so clean that the windows glinted like mirrors. Levi dismounted, dusted off his hat, and stepped toward the porch. Before he could knock, the door opened. The woman standing there looked to be in her mid-30s, with dark brown hair tied back, a simple blue dress with a flower-stained apron, and a thin face but eyes that pierced like sunlight through storm clouds. No greeting, no hesitation. She just looked at him and said flatly, "You're here for the horses, aren't you?" Levi nodded, a bit taken aback by her precision. "Yes, Levi Brooks. I saw the ad in the Gazette, said you had good stock." The woman, Clara Mason, showed little emotion, but there was something there like exhaustion, carefully tucked away. "They were my husband's work," she said. "He passed last winter. I'm just trying to keep what he left behind, at least until I can't anymore." Levi saw more clearly now the near-collapsing fence, the cracked barn, but the grass was trimmed, the house spotless. A woman fighting to preserve dignity, and 6 children, if the town rumors were true. Clara looked at him one last time and said, "If you want to see the horses, better do it before noon. Ellie, my youngest, has asthma fits around that time." It wasn't an invitation, nor a dismissal. Just another truth, a glimpse into a life quietly unraveling. Levi nodded, but something inside him stirred. He had only come for horses, but now he wasn't so sure that was still the only reason he stayed. Levi followed Clara across a yard scattered with dry grass and hoof prints. Behind the house, the grazing field opened up, nearly 24 horses, strong builds, steady stances, clear eyes, sleek coats. They didn't startle as Levi approached, just raised their heads with curiosity, snorting through their noses. He could tell right away these weren't idle ranch horses. They were trained, disciplined, smart, true stock. Clara stood beside him, arms folded. "My husband believed horses are companions, not tools. No whips, no spurs, just patience and respect." She wasn't making a sales pitch. She was defending the last piece of someone she loved. Levi knelt to check the hooves of a black stallion. Strong legs, soulful eyes. He let out a soft breath. The horse didn't flinch. "They're good," he said. "Too good to be sold cheap." Clara didn't react. She just stared at him for a long moment and then replied in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, "I don't have many choices left." That sentence carried weight, not about money, about time. Just as Levi opened his mouth to speak again, footsteps thundered behind them. A boy, about 15, rushed from the shed, holding a small hunting rifle, eyes locked on Levi. "Mom, is something wrong?" His voice cracked between a boy's worry and a man's responsibility. Clara turned, her tone gentler. "It's all right, Wyatt. This is Mr. Brooks. He's just here to see the horses." Wyatt glanced at Levi and nodded politely, but didn't lower the rifle. Levi didn't blame him. The kid had his reasons. This ranch survived because children knew how to be cautious. Levi had seen that look before, in kids who grew up too fast because the grown-ups around them had left, died, or failed. Then a small voice called from the second-story window, interrupting Levi's thoughts. "Mama, Ellie's coughing again." Clara turned instantly. "I'm sorry. You're free to look at the horses. I have to check on her." And she disappeared into the house, leaving Levi standing in the wind among the horses. He didn't rush, didn't leave. Part of it was unfinished business, but mostly it was because of that one phrase. Ellie's coughing again. That word, again, carried a tired familiarity, as if it had echoed night after night, through winter after winter, with no end in sight. Levi walked slowly toward a chestnut mare by the fence, brushing her mane gently. Warmth spread into his hand. Behind him stood an old wooden house. Inside it were 6 children, and a mother now sitting by a bed, holding a child coughing without medicine, without a doctor, with no one else but herself. Levi had never thought of himself as the kind of man who could be a father or a husband, but for the first time in years, as he looked at the horses, then back at that house, one quiet question surfaced in his mind. Not, "Which horse should I buy?" but, "How long could I stay here?" Midday at Mason Ridge Ranch was devoid of children's laughter, the clanging of hammers on stalls, or the jingling of bridles like other horse farms. Only the wind rustling through the loose tin roof, the clucking of chickens behind the crooked fence, and occasionally the dry cough of a child echoing from the second floor, slicing through the silence like a slow, deliberate knife. Levi sat on the wooden steps beside the horse barn, holding a rusty old canteen, his eyes fixed on the small window where Clara had disappeared. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but each prolonged cough from the child's throat involuntarily brought back memories of winter nights in the trenches, where he had heard his comrade Jesse cough similarly, only to fall silent forever after 3 days without medicine. Not everyone survives winter with only faith in their pockets. Nearly an hour later, Clara emerged. Her face was paler than before, her hair disheveled, and dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze remained steadfast. Levi stood up, said nothing, and handed her the canteen. She took it, nodded slightly in gratitude, and asked, "Have you found one you like?" Levi didn't answer immediately. He turned back to look at the horses again, but this time his gaze wasn't searching for something to buy. It was seeking something to hold on to. "I've seen things better than horses," he said. "A woman who hasn't given up, 6 children who still have innocence in their eyes, and a home that's still standing because faith hasn't broken." Clara pressed her lips together. Not out of emotion, but as if afraid that if she spoke, something inside would shatter. Instead of avoiding them, she sat down beside him, her shoulder lightly touching his, like two soldiers returning from the same battlefield. "You know," she said evenly, "I once thought, if I had enough money to cure Ellie's asthma, I'd sell everything. The horses, the land, even this house. Go somewhere else. A place where no one knows my husband used to deceive people with the reputation of good horses he didn't create." Levi didn't ask further, but Clara continued as if needing to unburden herself. "I was the one who trained them. But when he was alive, everyone believed it was thanks to him. When he died, people said I was just a foolish widow inheriting luck. And the kids, they don't need to hear that again." Levi nodded, his eyes looking into the distance. "I used to live in someone else's shadow. A friend who saved my life, and since then, everyone has called me a survivor. But surviving doesn't mean living." They sat in silence for a while. Then, from inside the house, the sound of a piano played. Offbeat, clumsy, but clearly a child trying to learn. Clara sighed. That's Bridget, the third one. She believes if she learns well enough, she'll get to study in town. I just hope she can hold on to that dream longer than this summer. Levi made no promises. No one in this land promises what they can't keep. But when he turned to look at Clara, their eyes met for a brief moment. And for the first time, there was no distance. Just two weary souls, trying to rebuild a broken world with their bare hands. And somewhere, very faintly, the old bugle in the saddle made a sound against the leather strap. A reminder that not everything lost is beyond recovery. Evening at Mason Ridge had no electricity, no streetlights, only the flickering of oil lamps through the windows, and the sound of insects blending with the whispering wind across the fields. Levi sat alone on the wooden porch steps, the brass bugle resting on his knee, his hand gently turning the dented mouthpiece, a habit he hadn't broken in 7 years. Upstairs, Ellie's coughing had subsided, replaced by Clara's whispered storytelling. Not clear words, just a steady sound like the heartbeat of a home striving to survive. Levi gazed into the dark night. In his mind appeared the image of Jesse, his comrade who had once played this bugle the night before the Battle of Grapevine Creek, where they were surrounded in the oak forest, and Jesse decided to distract the enemy so Levi could escape. Jesse didn't survive. Before running off, he had pressed the bugle into Levi's hand with a sentence Levi never forgot. "If you can still hear this bugle and feel something in your chest, then you still have a part of you worth keeping. Don't let it die with me." But for many years after that, Levi never played it again. Not because he forgot, but because he was afraid. Afraid that when the bugle sounded he would feel nothing. Afraid that Jesse was wrong. Afraid that he had truly died that day, only his body continued to wander. Suddenly, a soft sound interrupted his thoughts. A hesitant, clumsy blow, clearly from the bugle in his hand. Levi looked down, startled. In front of him was little Ellie, skinny, hair tousled, cheeks flushed with fever. She shouldn't be out in the cold. But instead of coughing, she was squatting, her tiny hands holding the bugle, trying to produce a sound, and each wrong note made her giggle. Levi knelt down. "Why are you out here?" Ellie looked at him, her eyes clear, her voice hoarse but full of determination. "Because Mom said, if I played your bugle, maybe you'd smile." Levi was speechless. He didn't know what to say. Ellie continued, still holding the bugle, not blowing anymore but hugging it tightly like an old teddy bear. "You know, this bugle is very sad. I can hear it. It misses someone." Levi swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if his heart tightened from emotion or from too many memories flooding back at once. He sat down beside her, looking at the moonless dark sky, then slowly said, "You're right. It once had a dear friend, a very good person, and I never had the courage to play it again until I heard you play." Ellie nodded seriously, then stood up unsteadily. "Mom says things that feel sad are because they were once loved." Then she walked back inside, leaving Levi sitting alone, the bugle lying still in his hands like evidence of something that had just changed. That night, Levi didn't sleep. He didn't leave the porch. When roosters began to crow in the distance and dawn broke, he stepped into the horse barn, took the reins, and checked each horse. But this time, not choose one for himself, but to see how many he could keep. And how. The next afternoon the wind picked up, not strong, but enough to scatter dry grass and make the wooden door behind the horse barn creak. Clara took Bridget and Sean to the small market in town to trade butter for cough medicine, leaving Levi with Wyatt, Michael, and little Ellie. The house was quieter than usual. Michael sat diligently writing math problems with a blunt pencil. Ellie slept on the couch, her breathing heavy but steady. Levi took the opportunity to help Wyatt clean the horse stalls and repair the fence broken by last night's wind. They didn't talk much, just work. A silent respect grows between the former soldier and the boy learning to be a man. But by late afternoon, as the sun cast an orange glow over the hills, Levi heard the sound of hooves approaching from afar. Not the heavy sound of a cart or a pack horse. These hooves were fast and urgent, with the clinking of metal, spurs. Wyatt heard it too. He dropped his hoe, squinting. "We weren't expecting anyone today," he said. Levi stood upright, his eyes narrowing, his hand resting on the old revolver at his side. "Take Michael and Ellie inside. Lock the door, bolt it. No questions. Do it now." Wyatt looked at Levi for a second, then ran off without needing further explanation. The hoofbeats grew louder. 3 horses appeared on the northern hill, dust rising behind them. The lead rider wore a black leather coat and long hair, his face nearly hidden by a beard and a scarf. But Levi recognized him instantly. Rafe Callahan, a former comrade. The man who once saved Levi's life, then betrayed him the next time. Rafe jumped off his horse before it fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground with an air of intrusion. "Levi Brooks," he sneered, his voice drawn out like a slithering snake. "What are you doing here, hiding again?" Levi didn't move. "Living. Living?" Rafe laughed. "I heard you're playing the good cowboy now. Fixing barns, babysitting, even keeping a bugle?" He glanced at the old bugle hanging on a nail by the porch. Levi stepped forward. "You shouldn't be here, Rafe." Rafe shrugged, then pointed toward the horse field. "I came fair and square. Just want to buy a few. Heard there's a good stock. My boys need horses that can run far, run fast." "Not for sale," Levi replied curtly. A brief silence. Then Rafe's eyes sharpened. "Not selling to me? Or not selling because you're afraid I'll bring up your past?" Levi said nothing, but his hand was ready. Rafe stepped closer, whispering low enough for only the 2 of them to hear. "I know you're hiding from the past. No, you took the money and left in the night, leaving us before we split the share. But if you want to forget everything, you should go farther than a place with women and children." Then he smirked, waving to his 2 companions. "Let's go." Didn't expect the guy who once shot straight to the heart is now afraid of a child's cry. As the hoofbeats faded, Levi remained still. His face showed nothing, but his hand clenched white. Rafe hadn't done anything yet, but that didn't mean he wouldn't return, and next time, he might not just be looking for horses. Wyatt stepped out of the house, eyes alert. Who were they? Levi turned, his voice low. "The reason I haven't had a home for 7 years. And now?" Now, I have to stop running." Levi looked up at the hill where the 3 riders had disappeared. The evening wind began to rise, carrying the scent of smoke from somewhere far away, the smell of danger, of challenge, but also the scent of a beginning, if he had the courage to stay. That evening, Clara returned from town with a basket of eggs she had traded from an old farmer and a few herbs for Ellie. Her face was streaked with road dust, her hands bruised and red from clutching the reins tightly during the long ride. But what caught Levi's attention wasn't her weariness. It was the intuitive sharpness in her eyes when she saw the faint trails in the sand near the porch. 3 new hoof prints, stretching from the barn all the way to the gate. She stood still for a moment, then looked Levi square in the eye without needing to ask. "Who were they?" she asked, softly, as if casually, but within the question was suspicion, responsibility, and a flicker of concern she tried hard to suppress. Levi didn't look away. He met her gaze like a man worn out by deception, finally realizing that if anything was worth protecting, it had to begin with truth. "They were men I once stood beside on the battlefield," he said. "Then they crossed the line and never came back. And now they want what? I think everything." Clara sat down on the porch steps, setting the basket beside her. Her hands clenched into fists. "Did you bring trouble here, Mr. Brooks?" The way she called him by his last name, measured, formal, made Levi pause. But he didn't object. "I used to think leaving was the best way to keep people safe. But all it did was turn me into someone with no place left to return to." "Then why are you still here?" Levi was quiet for a long time. The wind swept down from the hills behind them, carrying the scent of damp grass and ash. He looked toward the house, where Bridget was reading to Ellie. Michael was taping up a torn drawing, and Wyatt had already checked the stables at sunrise without needing to be told. And Clara, this woman, was still here. Not asking who he was, but something more important, what he had brought with him. "Because I saw something here I never thought I deserved," he said. "A chance, not to be forgiven, but to be needed." Clara said nothing, but she let out a long breath. Not one of disappointment, but the kind that comes from someone who's long stopped expecting anything from anyone. She stood, dusted off her skirt, lifted the basket, and gave Levi one last look before stepping inside. "If you're not sure you'll stay, don't let the children hope. They've lost enough already." The wooden door closed gently, but the sound struck Levi like a hammer to the chest. He remained alone on the porch, the brass bugle lying beside his foot like a quiet witness to everything he couldn't say aloud. He once thought he was the last survivor of a life full of failure, but now he began to understand. Surviving wasn't enough. He had to become someone others could believe in. And for Clara Mason and those 6 children, belief wasn't built on promises. It was built on action. The sky darkened after midday. At first, it was just thick clouds, clinging to the mountain ridge like smoke. Then came heavy gusts that howled against the roof, sweeping in red dust and rattling the unlocked door. Clara shut every window tight. Bridget gathered dry firewood. Sean herded the chickens into the coop, and Levi, without being told, ran to cover the barn with the tarp he had sewn together days ago. Everyone moved like they'd weathered storms all their lives, but there was one thing that made them all uneasy. Ellie was coughing again. No longer the scattered light coughs from a few days ago. This time, it was the sound of wind slicing through her lungs, sharp, relentless, and violent. Clara had to hold the girl down with both arms to keep her from seizing. Ellie's face turned blue. Her eyes bulged in panic, and all it took was one look for Levi to know. If they didn't get the right medicine within the next few hours, The girl wouldn't make it through the night. Clara tore through the wooden cabinet, searching frantically through the bottles of herbs she had bought from the market the day before. Her voice shook as she read each label. Not this one. It's not strong enough. Ellie needed a higher dose back in New Orleans. Bridget began to cry. Wyatt turned away. Levi said nothing. He simply stepped outside, grabbed his hat, threw on his leather coat, and mounted his horse. Clara looked up, panic rising in her eyes. "Where are you going?" "The old clinic down in Brady, 28 miles from here. Dr. Langley's the only one who still keeps injectable medicine." "In this storm?" Clara's voice cracked, nearly a scream. But Levi didn't answer. He was already in the saddle, reins tight in his hand. She ran after him, grabbing the stirrup. "You're not her father. You don't have to do this." Levi looked down at her, rain already pouring like a curtain between them. He met her eyes and said, "But I need to be the kind of man who doesn't leave her behind." Then he spurred the horse, shooting forward like an arrow from a bow. The wind howled in his ears. The rain lashed against his face. The dirt path had turned to slush, thick as tar. But Levi didn't slow. Mud sprayed into his eyes. His breath came faster beneath his soaked coat. But in his mind there was only one image. Ellie's eyes rolled back, her tiny hand clutching the bugle he had left beside her pillow like a charm against the dark. He would not arrive too late. Not again, not after Jesse, not after all the others he hadn't saved in time. When he reached the clinic, he pounded on the door until his hands bled. Dr. Langley, retired, frail, opened it halfway, ready to send him away. But Levi, breathing ragged, growled each word. "A 5-year-old girl is dying of asthma. If you don't save her, I'll die in her place." 10 minutes later, Levi galloped back through the storm, the vial wrapped in cloth and strapped tight to his belt. The return was worse. Fallen branches blocked the road. Mud came up to his horse's knees. But he didn't stop. Not this time. He reached Mason Ridge after nightfall, soaked to the bone, lips turning blue. But his hand still gripped the medicine like a father holding his only child. Clara ran out. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just held Ellie close in Wyatt's arms. Levi opened the vial and handed her the syringe. Clara injected it with shaking hands, and for the next hour they all sat around the oil lamp waiting, for Ellie's breath to slow, for the coughing to stop. At last, she slept. No more choking, no more jolting awake. Just the rain tapping on the roof, and the soft sound of breathing like a lullaby. Clara stood and walked over to Levi, who was slumped against the post, shoulders scraped, eyes sunken from exhaustion. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why did you do that?" Levi looked at her and smiled wearily. "Because if Ellie were my daughter, I'd never forgive myself if I didn't do everything I could. And if I want to stay here, I have to act like she already is." Clara said nothing, but for the first time she placed her hand on his shoulder, not as a ranch owner thanking a stranger, but as a mother silently grateful to a man who chose to stay. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, for the first time, Levi felt warm. 28 miles from here, Dr. Langley. He's the only one who still keeps injectable medication. "In this storm?" Clara nearly screamed, but Levi didn't answer. He was already on horseback, gripping the reins. She ran after him, grabbing the stirrup. "You're not her father. You don't have to do this." Levi leaned down, looking straight into her eyes as the rain began to pour like a waterfall. "But I have to be the man who doesn't leave her behind." And with that, he kicked the horse into a gallop, shooting forward like an arrow released from the bow. The wind howled in his ears. Rain whipped across his face. The dirt road had turned to thick mud. But Levi didn't slow. Waves of muck splashed up into his eyes. Each breath came heavier beneath his soaked coat. But in his mind there was only one image. Ellie's wide, panicked eyes, her tiny hand clutching the bugle he had left by her pillow like a talisman. He would not be too late, not this time, not after Jesse, not after all the others he hadn't saved. At the clinic, he pounded on the door until his hands bled. Dr. Langley, a retired physician, tried to wave him off, but Levi spoke through jagged breaths, each word like a growl. A 5-year-old girl is dying of asthma. If you don't save her, I will die in her place. 10 minutes later, Levi was galloping back through the storm, the medicine wrapped tightly in cloth and strapped beneath his belt. The return was worse. Fallen trees blocked the road, mud reached his horse's knees. But Levi didn't stop, not this time. He arrived at Mason Ridge deep into the night, soaked like a man dragged from a river, lips blue with cold. But in his hand, he still clutched the medicine like a father protecting his last child. Clara ran out. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She simply held Ellie, trembling in Wyatt's arms. Levi opened the vial and handed her the syringe. Her hands shook as she administered the dose. For the next hour, the entire family sat around the oil lamp, watching, waiting for Ellie's breathing to steady. And at last, it did. She fell asleep. No more choking, no more shivering. Just the sound of rain on the roof, and the soft, steady rise and fall of her chest like a lullaby. Clara stood and walked over to Levi, who sat slumped against the porch beam, shoulders scratched, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you do it?" Levi looked at her and gave a tired smile. "Because if Ellie were my daughter, I wouldn't forgive myself for doing any less. And if I want to stay here, then I have to act like she already is." Clara didn't answer, but for the first time she placed her hand on his shoulder, not like a ranch owner thanking a stranger, but like a mother grateful to a man who chose to stay. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, for the first time, Levi felt warm. 3 days after the great storm, the Texas sky was clear as glass. Ellie had recovered. Her cheeks were rosy again, full and bright, as though she had never hovered at the edge of life and death. Clara brewed herbal tea for the family while Levi repaired the broken porch with leftover timber from the shed. The whole ranch felt reborn. Bridget played the piano. Wyatt redrew the layout of the barn. Little Michael ran through the yard like a child discovering peace for the first time. But it is always when the hands loosen from the rifle that danger slips in through the back door. On the 4th night after the storm, Levi awoke to the faint sound of hooves, deliberate, not rushed. No lights, no barking dogs, just a sound that moved like someone trying not to be heard. Levi stepped onto the porch with his revolver in hand. A strange scent hit him, not cooking smoke, but burning oil. "The granary!" he shouted, then bolted. But it was too late. Flames erupted from the rear of the barn, where Clara's family kept their seed stores, winter hay, and 4 crates of old medicine. A small explosion popped like firecrackers, and the night sky turned crimson with firelight. Clara rushed out, clutching the children. Wyatt grabbed a bucket, but Levi stopped him. "It's not enough. Save the horses first." He knew how fire spreads, and he knew Rafe had left his signature here, not to burn it all down, but to remind Levi, "You don't get to live in peace." The whole family worked in tense silence. Levi fought the fire with a shovel, throwing dirt over the flames. Clara pulled the old garden hose while dragging Bridget away from the edge of the barn. By dawn, the fire was finally out. The granary had burned to the ground. 2 goats had suffocated. The seed stock for the entire season was gone. Clara collapsed beside the ashes, her singed hands trembling. Not from pain, but from fury. Levi approached and sat beside her. "I'm sorry," he said, offering no excuse. "They didn't come to steal, they came to break something. Inside." Clara turned toward him, and for the first time her eyes weren't guarded, but full of raw, exposed grief. "I've spent the last year living by one rule. Don't hope. Because if you don't hope, you won't be disappointed. But then you came, and I started to believe that someone might stay, that men could keep their word, that Ellie might grow up with memories bigger than sickness and death. But now, my home is burning again." Levi didn't speak. His smoke-scented hand clenched tightly. Then he looked at her, his voice low and grounded. "I can't replace your husband, and I can't erase what you've lost. But if you'll let me, starting tomorrow, I'll stay, as someone who rebuilds from the ashes. Not just horses, but everything they tried to burn." The next morning, Levi took Wyatt into town, not to call the sheriff, but to order new seeds and wood planks to rebuild the barn, and send a letter to an old friend, a lieutenant who owed Levi a life from the war. Levi knew he couldn't face Rafe alone, but this time he wouldn't fight to escape. He'd fight to stay. On the ride back, Wyatt asked, "Do you think they'll come again?" "They will," Levi said without hesitation. "Then why aren't you scared?" Levi looked at the boy, then toward the rising sun where the Mason Ridge roof came into view. "Everyone's afraid, but those with something worth protecting don't run." That morning, when Levi and Wyatt returned, Clara was clearing the scorched debris from the granary. Her hands were bandaged, her cheeks sun-darkened, and her eyes no longer shaky like the day before. She looked at Levi, not as someone waiting for him to prove something, but as someone measuring. Not trust, but readiness. Levi tied his horse and walked over. "I sent the letter. If the man I'm thinking of replies, we'll have a backup before sundown in 3 days." Clara didn't ask who or "Are you sure?" She just nodded, then handed him a handwritten list in faint pencil. Which boards needed replacing, how many fence posts were down, and the corners where drainage ditches needed to be dug. Levi glanced over it, then looked at her. "Where do you want me to start?" Clara answered simply, "Start with the place you plan to stay." It was the first real answer to a question Levi had never dared to ask aloud, whether he had the right to belong. In the next 2 days no one talked much, but things moved as if they'd lived together for years. Levi taught Michael how to use a hammer. Clara showed Bridget how to bundle herbs to sell at the market. Wyatt helped Levi rebuild the feeding troughs, and for the first time laughed out loud when he smashed his thumb. Ellie, now stronger, began learning how to blow the brass bugle again, even if she couldn't make a clear note yet. On the second night, when the house was asleep, Clara stepped onto the porch. Levi was keeping watch under the eaves, gun resting across his lap. She handed him a cup of water without a word. He took it and quietly asked, "I used to think I wasn't the kind of man anyone should bet on. Why were you different?" Clara looked straight at him, the oil lamp casting firelight in her eyes. "Because I'd rather bet on the man standing between my home and danger than wait for someone else to show up." Levi didn't respond, but for the first time in years he didn't feel the urge to run. He didn't need to prove himself, didn't need to claw for the title of good man. He just had to be there, do the work, keep his word, and live like he had been part of it all along. Just before Clara turned to go back inside, she paused. "Levi," she said softly, "if this comes back, not just burning a barn, but really trying to destroy everything, what will you do?" Levi gripped the gun tighter, his voice like stone. This time, I won't just stand guard, I'll fight. Because this isn't just a place I pass through, it's home." Clara nodded, no smile, no tears, just a nod, heavy with years of grit, and for the first time, permission for her heart to lean on someone else. The dawn of the third day came slowly. No birds sang, no wind stirred, only a heavy sky dragging streaks of leaden clouds as if even the earth and sky sensed something was about to fall. Clara rose early, brewed tea, and quietly placed a cup in front of each of the 6 children seated around the table. No one spoke. Even Ellie could feel the strangeness in the air. Levi stood by the window, his rifle resting on the table, coat draped over the back of a chair, eyes fixed on the distance, toward the red dirt road where Rafe Callahan's hoofprints had once marked the earth. Before noon, the sound of hooves broke the silence, not fast, not rushed, but intentional. Rafe didn't come alone. He brought 5 men, rough faces, rifles slung across their backs, chewing toothpicks like they were hunting. Levi stepped onto the porch, no gun, no backup, just a man standing tall at the door of his home. Clara told the children to stay inside, then walked out and stood beside him. Rafe smirked. Well, Levi, I heard you found yourself a home. Looks decent, I'll admit, but I'm not here to offer congratulations." Levi said nothing. Rafe turned to Clara. "You the one in charge here? Nice ranch? And I heard your horses, they're trained a special way." Clara didn't move. Her voice was cold steel. "There's nothing here for sale." One of Rafe's men let out a crude laugh, but Rafe raised a hand to silence him. "No need to get testy. We're just here to collect what's owed. Levi's got a debt, and debts get paid. You don't want to be part of this." Levi stepped forward, voice steady. "You had a deal with me, Rafe, no one else. That ended when we left the trenches. Yeah, I took the rations. To save my own life, and leaving you behind was so you wouldn't drag me down with you." Rafe's fists clenched. His jaw twitched. "I buried 2 men in that ice, Levi, and you vanished like a coward's ghost. And now I'm right here, in front of you. If it's me you want, don't drag women and children into this." Rafe sneered. "I don't want your life. I want everything you're trying to build. I want to watch you watch it all fall apart." The moment he finished speaking, a gunshot rang out. Not from Levi, but from the northern ridge. The bullet struck the dirt inches from the hoof of the man behind Rafe, sending his horse rearing up. In a flash, every weapon was drawn. But before anyone could fire, the thunder of galloping hooves filled the air. 3 riders emerged from behind the trees, leather coats marked with the insignia of the Federal Patrol. Leading them was a middle-aged man with a scar on his neck. Lieutenant McLean, the very man Levi had written to. He dismounted and raised his badge. "Callahan gang, you're under investigation for arson, armed threats, and attempted theft of property at Mason Ridge. I have full authority to detain you now, or give you the choice to leave before the law drags you in by the throat." A moment of absolute stillness fell. The world held its breath. Rafe hissed, "So you called in the cavalry, huh, Levi?" "Not to kill anyone," Levi replied. "Just to remind you, I'm not standing alone anymore." Rafe scanned the surroundings and saw the odds had turned. He scowled and turned his horse. "This isn't over," Levi answered, flat and cold. "I hope it is." Rafe rode off. His men followed. No one fired a shot. No one had to. When the dust finally settled, Levi turned back. Clara was still standing there, her hands clenched into the folds of her dress. She stared at him for a long moment, then, suddenly, stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest. "You were right," she whispered. "They didn't come back to take, they came back to break." Then she lifted her chin. "But this time, we don't break." The morning of the third day broke brighter than any before, not because the sun was out, but because there was no longer a shadow of threat at the doorstep. Mason Ridge Ranch was no longer just a farm, struggling to survive. It was beginning to look like a homecoming back to life. The children laughed as Bridget cracked jokes over breakfast. Wyatt, without being asked, brought out his toolkit and began repairing the broken fence. Clara washed vegetables at the well, no longer glancing nervously toward the hills like she used to. And Levi, instead of standing guard with a rifle, was carving his name into the weathered wood of the horse barn, right beside the faded letters of Caleb Mason, Clara's late husband. When Clara saw it, she was quiet for a long moment. Not because she disapproved, but because for the first time, someone had chosen not to erase her past, but to stand beside it. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice as firm as the first day they met. Levi set down the knife. "I've never been more sure of anything." He walked over and sat across from her on the porch steps. "You once asked why I stayed. Now I have another answer. Because nowhere else has ever made me want to become a better man. Every single day." Clara pressed her lips together. "I have something to confess, too," she said, her voice a quiet pause in an old song. "I never believed anyone would stay, even my husband, the man who built this place. Left for too long before he died. I survived by not expecting anything. But now I know. Living without letting anyone in is a kind of death, too." She looked at him directly, unflinching. "So if you're staying, Levi, I don't need promises. I just need you to walk into my house, not like a guest, but like a part of it." Levi didn't speak. He simply stood, opened the door, and stepped inside, not knocking, not waiting. The house hadn't changed. The same worn roof, the same creaky floors, the same noise from the kitchen where the children were laughing. But for the first time, his footsteps didn't feel out of place. Ellie ran to him and hugged his leg, smiling wide. "You're back," she cheered. Levi lifted her into his arms, holding her the way a father holds a child he didn't create, but chose to love fully. Clara stood behind him, saying nothing, only placing a quiet hand on his shoulder. A small gesture that meant, "We begin here." That afternoon, the whole family replanted the garden. Wyatt tilled the soil. Clara scattered seeds. Levi covered them with straw. Ellie sat nearby, drawing suns in the dirt with a stick. The skies weren't fully calm yet, and the past still held shadows. But here, in this place, amid the ashes, things once unspoken began to take root. Spring arrived at Mason Ridge without a warning. Just one morning. The wind lost its chill, the trees reached out with new green shoots, and birds began nesting under the eaves. Clara decided to host their first gathering in 3 years. Nothing grand, no townspeople, just the children. A few neighbors who had helped her after her husband passed, and her family, now with one more member. Levi woke earlier than everyone else, wearing the cleanest shirt he had, faded, but neatly pressed. His belt was a strip of old leather Wyatt had helped him punch new holes into. He built 2 more wooden tables, repaired the swing under the willow, and tuned up the old harmonica, a gift from Michael, who had written, "You don't have to play it well, just play." That afternoon, golden light spilled across the fields. Clara wore a soft blue linen dress, her hair braided, a sprig of lavender tucked behind her ear, the first time in years she had let herself soften. Bridget played a quiet melody on the piano. Wyatt brought jars of pear preserves he had made himself. Ellie, in a slightly too large white dress, stood before the group and recited a poem she'd written. Someone came, not with promises but with action, and stayed, as if they had always belonged. Everyone applauded, But Levi stood in silence. His eyes were rimmed with red. Not because of the words spoken, but because, for the first time in 7 years, someone had mentioned him not with guilt, not with the weight of his past, but with the simple recognition of his presence. Clara walked up beside him without needing a word. She took his hand in front of everyone, as naturally as if their hands had always known each other. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying." Levi gently squeezed her hand. "It wasn't because I was brave," he whispered. "It's because you gave me a reason not to leave." As the sun sank behind the hills, they sat around a small fire. Levi pulled out the old brass horn, the one that carried the memories of Jesse, of war, of regret, and for the first time played a short tune. His hands trembled, but the song came through. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but the sound echoed through everyone's hearts like a quiet signal. The wandering days were over. Far away, the sky still held a dim glow, but at Mason Ridge, the night had arrived warmer than any before. The children slept peacefully. Clara rested her head on Levi's shoulder on the porch bench. He said nothing. She didn't need to ask. Because sometimes a story doesn't need a perfect ending. It just needs to end in the right place, with the right person. And this time, Levi had found both. Not everyone is born into a perfect family, but sometimes the scars, the wrong turns, and even the mistakes lead us exactly where we were meant to be. And if you've ever felt like you were just passing through, remember this. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to stay once, and you'll never be a stranger again. Thank you for following this emotional journey with us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that reminds your heart. Everyone deserves a place to call home.